Vietnam is reeling from the devastating impact of Typhoon Kajiki, and the destruction is absolutely staggering. What was supposed to be a routine storm preparation turned into a deadly nightmare that left 3 people dead, 13 injured, and nearly 7,000 homes damaged across northern and central Vietnam. The typhoon that meteorologists described as absolutely terrifying has left a trail of destruction that will take months to recover from. We're talking about 28,800 hectares of rice fields flooded, 18,000 trees uprooted, and entire streets in the capital Hanoi transformed into raging rivers. This wasn't just another storm, it was a catastrophic event that caught even experienced forecasters off guard. So what made Typhoon Kajiki so unusually destructive? And why are experts calling this a preview of what's to come? To understand the magnitude of this disaster, we need to look at how Kajiki defied every prediction and became one of the most unpredictable storms to hit Southeast Asia in recent memory.
Mass evacuations have begun in Vietnam as Typhoon Kajiki made landfall a short time ago along the north-central coast. The powerful storm has already impacted parts of southern China, with experts fearing a repeat of the destruction wrought by the Typhoon Yagi last year. Damien Cave is the Vietnam bureau chief for the New York Times, and he joins me now from Ho Chi Minh City. Damien, good to have you with us. Now, firstly, how is the typhoon tracking at the moment, and what sort of conditions are expected over the next few hours?
Well, it appeared to make landfall around 3 p.m. here, so a couple of hours ago in north central Vietnam, as you mentioned. And so we're seeing huge storm surges, trees uprooted, power lines down, all the usual things you would see with a very strong typhoon. It's moving slowly, which is one of the concerns, that the heavy rains will not just lash the country on the immediate point of the storm, but for several days, which could lead to flooding and landslides. So that's
The storm's formation was unlike anything meteorologists had seen before. While typical typhoons take about a week to develop and dissipate, Kajiki formed directly over the South China Sea and made landfall within just 3 days. The storm reached its peak intensity of 166 kilometers per hour, while still 200 to 400 kilometers offshore, then maintained that devastating power as it approached Vietnam's coast. But here's what made it truly terrifying. Instead of following the predicted fast, straightforward path inland that major international forecasting models had projected, Kajiki did something unprecedented. It stalled for nearly 3 hours along the coastline, hovering like a predator before slowly moving inland and lingering over Ha Tinh and Nghệ An provinces for approximately 8 hours. The human cost became evident almost immediately. In the central city of Vinh, 65-year-old Tran Van Hung witnessed the storm blow a steel roof from the 8th floor of a building directly onto the middle of the street. It was so lucky that no one was hurt, Hung told reporters, but his relief was short-lived as the destruction mounted around him. Nguyen Thi Hoa, 60, described the horrifying sounds that filled the night air, trees twisting and the noise of the flying steel panels. She added that despite being used to heavy rain and floods, she had never experienced winds and gusts like those brought by Kajiki. The storm's extensive cloud cover created a much broader impact zone than typical typhoons, affecting 7 central and northeastern provinces, with fierce winds, torrential rain, and catastrophic flooding. But the real devastation became clear as dawn broke on Tuesday. Ha Tinh province, located directly in the storm's eye, suffered the most severe damage. Winds of 89 to 118 kilometers per hour combined with continuous heavy rainfall for over 20 hours tore the roofs off more than 6,300 houses and flooded another 1,100 homes. The agricultural destruction was equally devastating. Nearly 21,000 hectares of rice crops were completely destroyed, representing millions of dollars in lost harvests for farming communities already struggling with economic pressures. In neighboring Thanh Hoa province, while winds were somewhat weaker, persistent heavy rains flooded around 1,900 homes, leaving families with nowhere to turn as the storm's fury continued.
It's dangerous to be alone. After a public loudspeaker said to come to the stadium, I followed my neighbor and some police officers here.
I just hope the storm will pass quickly so I can go back to work. My children depend on me. Secondly, If something breaks, I won't have the money to repair it. It's hard. I'm a laborer, so I don't have the ability to spend a few million dongs to repair my place.
The infrastructure damage painted an even grimmer picture across the affected regions. Kajiki's powerful winds toppled over 740 utility poles and severely damaged the power grid, leaving more than 1.6 million customers without electricity. Nearly 870,000 people in Nayan province alone were plunged into darkness, with over 395,000 in Thanh Hoa and almost 350,000 in Ha Tin also losing power. The storm brought down 331 electricity poles across multiple provinces, causing widespread blackouts that extended far beyond the immediate impact zone. Transportation systems collapsed under the assault. 30 flights were rerouted and 35 more were completely canceled, while Dong Hoi and Tho Xuan airports in Quang Tri and Thanh Hoa temporarily suspended all operations. 3 passenger trains passing through central Vietnam were also forced to halt, stranding thousands of travelers. The flooding in Hanoi revealed the storm's far-reaching impact. Streets that normally bustled with motorbikes and cars were transformed into torrential rivers, with floodwaters on National Highway 6, the crucial link between Hanoi and northwestern provinces, reaching nearly 1 meter in depth in some places. Cars and motorbikes were completely stalled, creating massive traffic disruptions that paralyzed the capital for hours.
So as you mentioned in the introduction, in the coastal areas, there's certainly a lot of wind damage. There's been photos of severely damaged houses, lots of trees and power lines knocked over, fields flooded. But I should note that most of northern Vietnam is still experiencing very heavy rain, and that's to be expected pretty much through the rest of today, if not through tomorrow as well. Hanoi, the capital, is pretty badly flooded this morning, and we even had a storm this morning here in Ho Chi Minh City. So the impact is certainly far from over, especially in the mountainous areas where the impacts tend to not be known until a day or two after a storm passes. These are generally remote areas. Landslides are common, so those areas we still haven't seen very much from.
Nguyen Thuy Lan, a 44-year-old Hanoi resident, captured the helplessness many felt during those terrifying hours. It was impossible to move around this morning. My front yard is also flooded. The iconic West Lake, Hanoi's largest lake, overflowed its banks due to the relentless rainfall, while multiple villages in Bac Ninh province were completely isolated by the rising waters. What made this disaster even more significant was the scale of the evacuation effort that preceded it. Vietnamese authorities, recognizing the storm's potential for catastrophe, evacuated approximately 44,000 people across 5 provinces and called all fishing boats back to harbor. The military mobilized an unprecedented response. More than 346,000 personnel and 8,200 vehicles, including 5 aircraft, were deployed to support storm relief efforts. This massive mobilization involved over 16,500 soldiers and 107,000 paramilitary personnel, standing by for search and rescue operations, representing one of the largest pre-disaster deployments in Vietnam's recent history.
That's a good question. I mean, I think this time the evacuation orders came much more quickly and much more aggressively than they did last year. Yagi killed almost 150 people. It led to lots of flooding and all kinds of problems, and there was some very serious landslides. So I think authorities have moved more quickly in that regard. But you still have residents and other people saying, listen, this is a very extreme storm. We're going to get more and more of these. This is a climate change issue. It goes beyond simply an individual storm. And on that larger issue, Vietnam is still, like many countries, trying to sort of figure out its path forward as it deals with what are ultimately more and more extreme weather conditions over many years.
Yes, and for those who will perhaps sadly lose their homes because it's such a powerful storm that is hitting, and given what was seen at last year's big Typhoon Yagi, how long is it before people are able to return to where they live? Or
Yet despite these preparations, Kajiki represents something much larger and more ominous than a single destructive storm. This was the 5th typhoon to hit Vietnam in 2025 alone, and the 10th to strike the broader region this year. The pattern is becoming increasingly clear and increasingly deadly. According to Vietnam's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, more than 100 people have been killed or left missing from natural disasters, in just the first 7 months of 2025, with the economic losses estimated at more than $21 million. These numbers become even more staggering when compared to last year's devastation. Vietnam suffered $3.3 billion in economic losses. In September 2024, as a result of Typhoon Yagi, which swept across the country's north and caused hundreds of deaths. The United Nations Children's Agency, UNICEF, issued a statement that captures the growing crisis facing the region. With disasters striking so often, children and families barely have time to recover before their homes, schools, and sense of safety are disrupted again, said June Kanugi, UNICEF Regional Director for East Asia and the Pacific. Each new storm compounds the damage of the last, leaving children increasingly vulnerable to the cascading effects of climate disasters. This cycle of destruction and incomplete recovery is creating a humanitarian crisis that extends far beyond immediate storm damage. Scientists are increasingly linking these intensifying storms to human-caused climate change, which is driving more intense and unpredictable weather patterns that make destructive floods and storms more likely, particularly in tropical regions. The Northwest Pacific typhoon season, which stretches across the entire year but peaks in late summer, is producing storms that are not only more frequent, but also more unpredictable and destructive than historical patterns would suggest. Kajiki, designated as the basin's 14th named storm of 2025, exemplifies this troubling trend. The Vietnamese government's response reveals both the scale of the challenge and the determination to address it. Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh signed Directive No. 148, calling for urgent measures to address the aftermath of Storm Kajiki and subsequent flooding. Provincial authorities have been instructed to mobilize resources and forces to access isolated areas and accelerate recovery measures, while local governments are directed to continue search and rescue operations, provide medical treatment for the injured, and support households that have lost family members. The directive includes immediate actions such as repairing storm-damaged housing, arranging temporary shelter, and providing food, clean water, and essential supplies to displaced households. Educational and healthcare facilities must be restored before August 30th, while damaged transport routes are being cleared to ensure safe movement and facilitate relief operations. This timeline reflects both the urgency of the situation and the massive logistical challenge of rebuilding infrastructure across multiple provinces simultaneously. The government's comprehensive response demonstrates lessons learned from previous disasters, but it also highlights the increasingly impossible task of keeping pace with accelerating climate impacts. As Kajiki weakened into a tropical depression and crossed into Laos, its impact continued to ripple outward. Thai authorities issued weather alerts for 58 provinces and warned that the storm could lead to flash floods and landslides in northern and northeastern regions. Waves in the upper Andaman Sea and upper Gulf of Thailand were forecast to reach up to 3 meters, extending the storm's dangerous influence across multiple countries and millions more people. The international implications of storms like Kajiki extend far beyond immediate humanitarian concerns. Vietnam's position as a crucial link in global supply chains means that disasters of this magnitude can disrupt manufacturing, agriculture, and shipping networks that affect consumers and businesses worldwide. The destruction of rice crops alone represents a significant impact on global food security, while the disruption of transportation and power systems affects everything from electronics manufacturing to textile production. Looking ahead, the pattern established by Kajiki and similar storms presents a sobering preview of the challenges facing Southeast Asia and other tropical regions. The combination of rising sea temperatures, changing atmospheric patterns, and increased urbanization in vulnerable coastal areas creates a perfect storm for future disasters that could dwarf even Kajiki's devastating impact. Vietnam's experience with this typhoon offers crucial lessons for disaster preparedness, but it also underscores the fundamental reality that adaptation measures alone cannot address the root causes of intensifying climate impacts. The story of Typhoon Kajiki is ultimately a story about resilience in the face of an accelerating crisis. From the families sandbagging their homes in Vinh to the military personnel coordinating massive evacuation efforts, Vietnam demonstrated remarkable preparedness and response capabilities. But it's also a story about the limits of human adaptation when faced with increasingly powerful and unpredictable natural forces driven by global climate change. As recovery efforts continue and communities work to rebuild what Kajiki destroyed, the broader questions raised by this disaster remain urgent and unanswered. How many more storms like Kajiki can coastal communities withstand? What level of destruction becomes the new normal? And most critically, what actions can the international community take to address the underlying drivers of these intensifying disasters before they overwhelm our capacity to respond? The answers to these questions will determine not just Vietnam's future, but the fate of vulnerable communities worldwide as our planet continues to warm and weather patterns become increasingly extreme and unpredictable.